Okay. All right. So thank you once again. Good morning here for me in Philadelphia, US. I'm sure it's evening for most of you in India, Pakistan, other parts of the world. Whoever's joining, welcome aboard. This is day 2. I'm assuming that most of you, if not all of you, were also here yesterday and attended the entire session, but I also noticed that some had left the session after we got done the first few segments, so that's okay. Just please know that nobody's trying to become an expert and nobody's trying to make anyone an expert, okay? Get the word expert out of your dictionary. Okay, I'm not an expert. Dr. Gul is not an expert. Yes, we have a little more experience, a little more insight into the process because we've gone through our doctoral journeys, but that does not make us any superior to anybody else. For me, equality and mutuality are extremely critical. Those that work with me closely know that I'm very available. I'm very responsive to any messaging that comes. So when I work with people, I work with them very, very closely and in a very collaborative way. So it's important to set that stage, okay? So also, maybe I'm repeating myself from yesterday, but those that were not here should know that this is not the end of the journey. So it's not as though we've done the second webinar and now it's all done. Now you are left there hanging out there. That is not true. This is the beginning of a journey. And it is my hope that we can continue this journey and be of help to one another, to develop some kind of a forum. I don't like the WhatsApp groups. They become too chaotic. And especially with a lot of people, everybody will start. Then after a while, people start putting songs and guzzles and this and that, which is okay, but it takes away from the entire purpose of that. So we can create some other group. Now I have a forum that we can create on LinkedIn and continue our learning there, but we'll figure it out. We haven't reached that point. So all of this will be recorded. Today's session, yesterday's session was recorded. It will be uploaded to my YouTube channel, which is on qualitative research, and you folks will be provided a link. So now that you're on my distribution list, you will be receiving information from time to time on what else Gul and I are doing, you know, in terms of, because her specialty is more, Gul, yours is more quantitative, right?
Yes.
Quantitative mixed method. So you can be a great resource to them from the quantitative realm, and I can be, of course, a resource to them from the qualitative realm. And there will be others too that we can bring into the fold who can create this. So I'm assuming that some of you were paying some attention to this while I was doing this. So let me just go back just one slide here. IPA and bracketing. So IPA is interpretative phenomenological analysis. And the reason I'm covering this is IPA is a very, very important analytic approach in phenomenological inquiry, okay? And I would not be doing justice if I just skipped this whole thing and jumped into grounded theory, because it would really not be the best use of our time together. So with that, bracketing is something that you're going to hear about a lot in qualitative research. And what is really bracketing? We all have, as researchers, our assumptions, our preconceived notions. I'm hovering my cursor here so you can see, and paradigmatic lenses as they relate to a study phenomenon. So if you're studying the phenomena of emotional abuse, studying the phenomena of lower back pain, studying the phenomena of what is it like for unwed mothers to be raising a child, et cetera, what is it like for engaged employees. So whatever phenomena you're researching, you are not researching in a vacuum. It's not as though you know nothing about the phenomena. Of course you do, because of your life experiences, through your interactions with others, etc. You have an understanding of the phenomena. And that is the danger there when you're doing research. The danger is that you can bring in your preconceived notions and theoretical lenses and your understanding and biases about phenomena, such that these biases then they interfere with the collection of data. Okay, because you're already putting your own spin on that. And so by bracketing, what are you bracketing? Bracketing is you're putting into brackets, into parentheses, your preconceived notions, paradigmatic lenses, etc., so that they do not impinge on the research. So they do not interfere with the research process. Now, it is not humanly possible to totally divest yourself from that because it is a part of you. So it's a conscious endeavor to put that aside for the purpose of the research, not put that aside forever, not to put that aside to never go back to, but to put it aside for the purpose of research. While the researcher consciously brackets the biases and assumptions, you allow your reflexivity to surface. You allow your reflexivity to surface and make careful notations about how your reflexivity, how your experiences, how your ideas are impacted by the study, or how your ideas, biases are impacting the study. So that reflexivity, your researchers' individual experiences of doing the research, become a very critical aspect in qualitative research. It is not so in quant. Quant, as a matter of fact, if you bring in reflexivity, you're going to have eyebrows raised because they're going to say, well, what kind of research are you doing? You really have to be set aside. You have to stand apart from the object of your research or the subject of your research. So here, reflexivity is an important aspect. In this way, IP is a unique and novel approach to studying phenomena. It is not one size fits all. Folks, please don't fall in love with phenomenology, or by that, I mean any other methodology. Really, every methodology has a different nuance, there has a different approach, different framework. And so you have to understand what your research question is and what methodology can best answer that research question. All right, so don't put the cart before the horse. I've seen some students who are wet behind the ears, they fall in love with the methodology such that they say, so I'm only going to do phenomenology. I love phenomenology. I love IPA. I'm only going to do, when I've asked them, why do you want to do IPA? They're blank. They don't understand why they would like to use that process. So please know that this is a very, very important phenomenon, and you really have to be very careful about how you approach this. So the next slide will cover the interpretation and analytic process. So now let me say this, that, okay, so you had 15 interviews that you did, or 10, or 5, or 8, it doesn't matter the number, but you've collected data from these interviews through semi-structured, in-depth interviews, where you've gone deep, not wide. And that's why you will hear that in IPA, the corpuses, the participant group tends to be small. It's not like 50, 100 people, okay, like you would find in a quantitative study. You would have typically very small corpuses. So you can actually do an IPA with about 5 to 7 interviews. But typically what I'm finding is if you're doing a doctoral research and a doctoral dissertation, you cannot get away with just 4 or 5 because they're going to look at you and say, oh, what kind of data are you going to collect? You're not going to have sufficient data to collect. So do more. So they might say, oh, do 25 interviews. So when somebody from your research team or your dissertation committee says, oh, do 20, they don't understand the nuances of IPA. 20 interviews? Do you know how much data, the voluminous data that will be collected? When you transcribe it, folks, you're going to know how much data is collected. So please keep them lower, okay? Like maybe 10 to 15 people tops, okay? And that's the way you can go really deep, because you're going to be looking at it conceptually. you're going to be, and I'm talking about the themes, you're going to look at the themes conceptually, you're going to look at the themes linguistically, you can look at the themes textually. So when you're going so deep into something, you don't want to be dealing with a large data set. Okay, so now let's say you've collected data. So just for the sake of keeping it simple, you collected 15 interviews. You've transcribed them. Everybody knows what transcription is. I do my transcription myself. Now, some people source it out because they don't have the patience to do transcription. I like to do my transcription. I like to do my analysis manually. Now, I am not saying that do not use the software like Atlas or NVivo, and there are other software, Deduce and stuff. So you can use whatever you want to use, but just make sure that your software is not going to be doing the analysis for you. All the software is bringing out are some themes, bringing out some convergences, divergences, so it helps the process. It's a companion for you, but this is not going to be, so you don't turn it over into the NVivo, and NVivo does the entire dissertation for you. No, that's not true. So please understand that. All right. So now you've collected these themes, you've collected all this data. What do you do with this data? You got like 300, for me, it was about 350, maybe 325 pages of data, qualitative data. Now, how do I go about it? How do I make sense? How do I draw meaning from this data? So here's a process that we have laid out for you. And by the way, don't feel anxious that, oh my goodness, at the end of the webinar, this is all going to go away. Don't start writing notes. Please concentrate here. You will be provided upon request. If you need a copy of the PowerPoint, I'd be happy to provide it to you. We'd be happy to answer. So do not waste your mental energy on making copious notes here. That's not the purpose. Purpose is to stay focused on what I'm sharing here with you. This is a very critical part. So here's what you have are 6 stages. This is a turnkey process of taking a transcript and going to the final analysis. All right. And if you follow this process or some variation of this process, you're going to find your life will get a lot easier. Okay. Because phenomenology and a lot of the other qualitative methodologies are very convoluted, they're twisted, they're all entangled. So many different themes, so many contradictions, so many different variabilities. And so that's another reason why people don't, some people like to stay within the quantitative realm. They don't want to delve in this because also this deals with thoughts, feelings, emotions, and deep pathos. All right. So anyway, with that said, so now you have a transcript. So you take the identifying themes and recurring patterns in the first transcript. So you've got 15 transcripts. Keep 14 transcripts totally away in a pile. Do not look at them. Take the first interview, the first transcript, all right? Look at it carefully, okay? Identify themes and recurring patterns. Remember, I was talking about streams of consciousness yesterday. Anything and everything that's coming to you as you're reading a transcript. But is it anything and everything? If you're doing a study phenomena of emotional abuse and there's somebody's talking about cricket, is that germane to your process? No, it's not. So you're not talking about any items that are extraneous to the research. You're talking about words and expressions and streams of consciousness that relate to your study phenomena. Folks, look at this here. The study phenomena is I'm hovering my cursor here. The study phenomena, keep always your studied phenomena in mind. List all the words, phrases, ideas, convergent patterns, keeping the study phenomena in mind. This is raw data, by the way, okay? So in the transcript, when you make the transcript on Word, make sure you have enough margin. You're typically in APA, we keep a 1-inch margin. You can keep a little bit more than that to be able to write in that margin. So in the left margin, list all the words, phrases, ideas, convergent patterns, everything that relates to that, only that interview, only the transcript number 1. This, folks, is raw data. Okay. This is right now hasn't gone through the grind. It hasn't gone through the analytic process. It has just been identified. Now, stage 2, closely examine what you wrote in the left margin. Okay, it's the same transcript. You're only on transcript number 1, folks. This entire step is transcript by transcript. It is not looking at 15 together. It's just looking at individual. That's why the focus of IPA is very ideographic. Okay. So closely examine your notations in the left margin. Okay. And look for emergent themes and patterns. Now, let me give you an example. So you took the first transcript, and in the left-hand side, you wrote down, let's say, I'm just taking an example. Hypothetically, you had about, like, say, 25 expressions or words or streams of consciousness data that emerged that have to do with the study phenomena, right? Now, are all 25 emergent themes? I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they are not. But typically, when you closely look at this data set in the left margin, you will realize that there is some repetition, right? There are some processes, some themes that are emerging, which could be clubbed together, which could be grouped together into one particular theme, all right? So if you're looking at, let's say, an employee dysfunctional behavior in the workplace, or you're looking at conflict in the workplace, you may find, and if that's your phenomena, you may find that there are some words that directly relate to that conflict. So there is no need to put 5 different subheads. You create one subhead or maybe 2 subheads and club those together under that. So now take a separate piece of paper, okay? This is a transcript. You in the left-hand margin. So everybody understand, in the left-hand margin, you put the raw data in, you're looking at the raw data, you've closely examined that, and now you're finding that from the 25, remember I told you, but maybe it's 25 raw words that came out. Maybe you want to narrow it down to 10, 12, 13. I don't know. You know, I mean, it depends. Through a process of distillation, we are narrowing this down. So on a separate piece of paper, title it interview number 1 or transcript number 1. List the emergent themes and phrases from stage 2 without worrying too much about connections between each theme. All you've done is you've taken from raw data, you've polished the data a little bit to see convergences, and then you've created subheads for that, now which you're calling emergent themes. Okay. On that same paper, begin clustering the themes for interview number 1. So now you started with 25 raw words, you're down to say 10 or 12, okay? Maybe you'll find, if you look closely at the 10 or 12, that you can narrow it further down to maybe 7 or 8, or maybe 6. And you cluster them and put the titles for each clustered theme, right? So you may have 5 or 6 groups or subheads on the same, this is on the separate piece of paper. I'm going to try to make your life easier because this can become a very complex process. Now imagine doing this for 15 interviews. It's a lot of grunt work involved. So this process, I'm deconstructing, I'm unpacking the process and making it simplified for you so that you don't get into a little hairy situation there. All right, so now what you've done is you've clustered the themes. So now you came down to about 5 or 6. Remember, you started with 25 25, and you're now down to 6, maybe 6 themes, right? Closely examine this paper and start distilling the themes and grouping them into superordinate and subordinate themes. Now, what is a superordinate theme and what is a subordinate theme? Let's say you came down to 7 or 8 themes under stage 4. All right. Are all those 6 or 7 themes directly relating to your phenomena on the top, on a high priority? In other words, are they most germane, most relevant to your study phenomena? Or are some less relevant than the others? So a superordinate theme is the few themes that are most closely associated with your study phenomena. They most closely inform the study phenomena. They most closely attribute to the study phenomena. And they are the most important ones. And the subordinate are also important nonetheless, but they are less important. So you make a notation that these are what you consider to be superordinate, and these are what you consider to be subordinate themes. Now, using the steps outlined in 1 to 5, which is stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, repeat the entire process, the same process for all the remaining interview transcripts. Now, you did this for 1, do it for the remaining 14, correct? So now what are you going to have? You're going to have all the 15 transcripts with stuff written in the left corner, in the left margin. And you will also have 15 separate sheets in which you have extrapolated. You've extracted from your transcripts and you've created these superordinate and subordinate themes, right? You do this for all 15. Once you're done, create a comprehensive master listing of superordinate and subordinate. What is a master listing? A master listing would be a roll-up, okay? So let us just say, to keep it simple, we had about 6 really strong themes that came out between subordinate and superordinate, all right, for each of the transcripts. So if it's 5 or 6, let's say 6. Now 6 times 15 is what, right? You get where I'm going with this? It's a lot of themes. So in the roll-up, what you do is you take from each of those 15 separate sheets and put them in this master listing table. And in this master listing table, you are not mentioning whether it's interview 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're just bringing the data, and all you're doing is coding it as either superordinate or subordinate. And even if you didn't do that, this process, like cream, rises to the top, and as you will see. So make sure that whatever data you've created, okay, is supported by verbatim extracts from each interview. So if you've created this, the themes, which is a superordinate rises to the top. That's the top, the highest priority. Subordinate is less important, but nonetheless germane to your study phenomena. So now you've got 90, right? Right? 6 times 15 is 90. Now, that's a lot of stuff out there. Are all 90 going to be written up in your study? You'll go crazy writing about 90 separate superordinate and subordinate themes. So what you're doing is, when you create a master listing, okay, of this, you will once again go through a process of distillation, a process of reduction. We use the word reduction in phenomenology, to make sure that is there repetition going on there? And there probably will be quite a bit of repetition. Even though you did not consult one interview with the other, okay, when you were doing this analysis part, you will notice that some of those themes are repeating and they could be put under a separate head. So maybe from 90, you may come up with, oh, I don't know, maybe 20, 25, once you distill it. So you take those 25 that are the top themes that are most relevant to your dissertation, to your dissertation research phenomena. And you take them and identify those. And what you do then is you delete all the others because now you've already dealt with that. What are you trying to do? It's kind of like a funnel, right? You put in a lot of stuff into the funnel, but as the funnel narrows down, only the distillate is coming through. So through this process of brushing off, reducing, you have allowed from what could 90 themes, emergent themes, to down to maybe, I don't know, at the end you might have 10. From 90, you came down to 10. Now, are all 10 important? I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they are not. But you will find that as you drill down and look at those 10 superordinate and subordinate themes, you will find that you can still get rid of some which are repeating. And then what you're left with is the cream of the crop. These are the few themes that you will be reporting in your interview. Now, does that mean that we are letting you go? then you're not going to write about the others? No, you don't write about the 90 emergent themes. You write about the master listing when you narrow it down to these 10. These 10 have to be written about. Now, folks, when I say written about, what do I mean? I mean you're then making linkages with your chapter 2 literature review. Remember, you did a literature review for your dissertation? The literature review are conversations that are happening around your study phenomena in the academia world, okay, or in the extant literature. Who else has been writing about this? What were their findings? So you bring in, so now what happens is your themes are talking to the literature. You're bringing in citations, you're bringing in all of that stuff. But even before you do that roll up, you're writing individually. And here is the grunt work, folks. You're not just getting away with, okay, so I've got 10 themes, I'll write about 10 and dissertation done, chutti, right? I get a PhD. No, it doesn't, it's not that easy. It's a terminal degree, folks, okay? So what you're doing is you will be required under the analysis chapter, which is typically chapter 4, to individually write about every single manuscript. And I'm saying manuscript, transcript. So you would be writing about interview 1, interview 2, interview 3, interview 4. And the way you would go about it is you would start with the interview 1 and just make a short description, a blurb about who this person was that you interviewed. Of course, you're only using pseudonyms. You are not using actual names because you've signed a confidentiality agreement that you're not going to share the names or the context. You don't say names of the companies. You don't say what context. You don't give away this information because otherwise you would be in breach of confidentiality, and the citations and penalties are very severe, at least in the US, because you have signed a declaration with the IRB, Institutional Review Board. Now in India, you have ethics boards and I'm finding more and more universities have their own ethics committees that will oversee your work to make sure that you're not opening yourself up to problems, and in some severe cases, even to litigation, okay? So be very careful that you're using pseudonyms. So when you're using that, you're actually doing the 14 or 15 interviews, writing about each one of them. And when you're writing the individual cases, we call them cases, not case studies, but cases, you are actually taking verbatim extracts. Remember, I told you here in stage 6, make sure you have recorded verbatim extracts for each interview. Because when a reader is reading your study and you're saying interview number 1 or participant number 1, and let's say it was Tom, or let's say it was Radha, or let's say it was Lakshmi, you know, you're using a different name, all right? But a reader wants to know, who was this person, Lakshmi? Okay, what is her background? Then just a few lines. So you are introducing the reader to who this person you interviewed. And then you are extracting from your transcripts the questions and answers. You asked as a researcher this question, her response was such and such. Now, what data are you relating this to? Only data that have to do with your research phenomena. Folks, very, very important. Do not go all over the place, because sometimes in a 90-minute interview, you can have people spending about 20 minutes or 15 minutes talking about something totally extraneous that has nothing to do with the research. Now, that's an issue right there for you to look at, because if you're letting people get away with this and they're talking about everything that you don't want to discuss, then you have to steer them back. And if you cannot steer them back, you just have to, I guess, in worst case scenario, you have to cut short the interview. All right? Because you can't spend time and precious energy and your resources into collecting data that have nothing to do with your study phenomena. All right? So be very careful about that. All right? So once you've done that, you're writing all the individual 15 cases, all right, with verbatim extracts. So what did you ask as a participant? Actual, and why, people ask me, why do we have to have the verbatim extracts? It is evidentiary data to support that this is work that you've done. Because you could just be taking something hypothetically, not that I'm suggesting any of you would, but some unethical people will just make this stuff up, all right? Everything has to be available. So even though your dissertation chair may not want to see each and every interview, each and every transcript, but you have to keep it under lock and key, secure, because he may ask you or she may ask you, hey, you're writing this verbatim extract. May I take a look at the interview number 3 or interview number 5? They're cross-checking, okay? Believe me, they will do this. Because guess what? Their neck is also on the block. They're the supervisors. They want to make sure this is solid research, ethically done, where you did not hurt any of your interviewees psychologically, okay? So what did you do? So the transcript is going to show all of that. Okay, so this is why I wanted to spend some time on this. And let me go to the next slide. So now what happens? So you've done the analysis. Okay, so what do you do with it? Just go home? PhD granted? Whoa, it's not that easy. You have to now write about this, right? And not only just the 15 interviews that I talked about. Guess what? There's a huge Goliath coming your way, and which is the chapter number 5, where you are summarizing, you're reporting the outcomes, reporting your findings, reporting reflexivity, reporting about any deviant findings that you had. So writing up is the final stage of analysis and interpretation. It is the bulk of the work you're going to do. Don't fool yourself into thinking just because you collected the data, you analyzed the data, and now it's done. Your writing of the study constitutes 60 to 70% of the entire task. Okay, please read that first one carefully. Given the idiographic focus of IPA, each participant's account is treated and written about on its own merit and terms. Remember, as I was talking about this process, I said, keep aside the 14 interview transcripts. Just look at one, then look at the second, then look at the third, then look at the fourth. Because if you look at all 15, A, you're going to feel totally overwhelmed, and B, you're not going to be able to make sense of it. We're all human beings. And then you're going to say, okay, well, I don't want to spend time with that. Maybe what I should do is, let me feed this darn thing into NVivo or Atlas and let them kick it out. Well, guess what? They're not human beings. You cannot substitute that for the human eye. They're just going to kick out, the softwares are just going to kick out some buzzwords, some keywords in there, but what do you do with that? All right. So just remember, each participant's account is treated on its own terms with the respect that each account deserves. Idiography means specificity and particularity. You're looking at their specific lived experience, their particular lived experience as they relate to the study phenomena. IPA writing is about evocative descriptions. Now, what is evocative descriptions? Okay. And for some of you that are into the quantitative realm, this is all going to feel like Greek and Latin to you. It really is, in a manner of speaking, because evocative descriptions means you're rambling. Your dots are not first connecting. There is no structure there. You're trying to make sense. You're trying to draw meaning from somebody's narratives, right? Which add to the novelty of this approach, but also adds to the nuance and complexity of doing phenomenological inquiry. Interviews are referred to cases, as I mentioned. In the analysis, the interview first writes about each case, providing supporting extract from the actual interview. At this point, the researcher's only making sense was what we... So when I remember I told you about the 15 separate cases you're going to write about in chapter 4. In this, you're only making sense as the researcher of data that was provided from the interviews. You are not using your own biases, your own framework, your own judgment. Please, folks, be very careful. This is the trap that people fall into. They start making interpretations, and many of us are, are really blamed for making judgments about others. Well, this is a case of judgment. So you're making a judgment, I know exactly what this participant is talking about. I know everything about the transgender community. I know everything about unwed mothers. What is she saying? No, please stay true to the process. So don't put your own spin on that. Whatever data is obtained from the interviews, support that data with actual extracts from the interviews. Because that provides evidence. That provides a background, that provides support for your work. Oh my goodness, so this researcher actually did that much work. Yeah. And this is what has been extrapolated from those transcripts, extracted from the transcripts. All case narratives are individually written. The researcher then distills the data and creates a group narrative. I talked about that in my previous stage. At this stage of writing, the researcher can and must use her own interpretive framework. Now, folks, while in this case, where I see my cursor, this is, you're only using data that emerged from the interviews, only the interview data, okay? When you write the group narrative, what is the group narrative? When you roll up, remember I did the master listing and you start writing about the master listing, subordinate and superordinate themes. At that point, you start to make connections with your literature review chapter. Remember, you did a literature review chapter, chapter number 2. Now what you're writing about, you're making connections with and citations from the literature. Because this is where you're demonstrating your scholarship. That no, you just didn't take the data that was collected from the interview, but now you're making sense of the data and using your scholarship from the academy, from other researchers who wrote about this phenomena. And you're making connections, you're analyzing, you're not just reporting, folks. You're using an analytical lens. And when you use an analytical lens, you're using your faculties, but you're also supporting it with the work that others have done. Okay, like Bosch and Lom, 1994, wrote about this in such a way, and paraphrasing this one. That is what constitutes that chapter when you start writing the framework. Okay, so your interpretive framework comes in. Okay, remember in the beginning you bracketed everything so that your framework, your preconceived notions, your biases don't land up and interrupt or corrupt, I'm sorry, not interrupt, but corrupt the data. Well, here now, let it go. Now you're bringing your framework in. Because that is what your committee wants to see. That is what we want to see as academics, your analytic skills. Now you're making an analysis, interpretative, reliable, and not reliable, but a solid interpretative framework from not only your understanding, but your understanding as supported by, very critical piece, your understanding of the phenomena as supported by the extant literature. This is what they want to see, okay? So, all right, so enough said about that. Let me go to the next slide, further reading. At the end of the IPA presentation, Interpretive Phenomenological Analysis, all of you have probably read the book or not read the book. I would highly recommend. It's the Bible of IPA, written by Jonathan Smith, Flowers, and Larkin at the University of Birkbeck in UK. Okay, IPA was developed in the correct me if I'm wrong, but probably in the early to mid 90s. But now, literally hundreds and hundreds of full-length dissertations have been done. Now, they were all health psychologists. So please know that there's a lot of application of IPA in the field of medical research, okay, nursing, and fields such as that. All right. Phenomenology of Practice, Max van Manen. You'll hear the word, the author's name, Max van Manen, amazing author, very contemporary author in phenomenology. He's written 2 books. I would recommend researching lived experience if you're a novice to phenomenology. And then if you want to advance your knowledge, you can certainly go into Max van Manen's Phenomenology of Practice, okay? But that's a more dense, heavier text, all right? But between them, if you just look at those 3 to begin with, as a novice researcher, I think you'll find more than enough to get started. And then, of course, you'll be citing other authors also. All right. So with that, I think, Gul, we can open it up to some Q&A.
Yeah, sure.
Because I've gone on at lightning speed. I just wanted to make sure that I cover most stuff.
Yeah,
so,
Arvind wants to ask something.
Go ahead.
Arvind, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. Okay, now am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Behal, my question is something which is related to what my question was yesterday. Can you tell me?
Yes.
What type of studies are possible only through phenomenology and not possible through any other qualitative research? Now, I've been using a lot of qualitative research, but I've been using focus groups and I've been using depth interviews.
Okay.
Now, I just want to know where will these two fail and phenomenology will be required, and only that you didn't say, you said yesterday it is not a methodology, but whatever. Can we identify few areas
Yes.
where only phenomenology will work and nothing else will work?
Okay. That question just threw me off a little bit, because when we use the word only, we are talking about absolute terms. Okay. Just remember that phenomenology, more than a methodology, more than a field of inquiry, is actually a philosophy of research. Okay, it's a philosophy of research. It's how you approach a research phenomena. All right. So so to say that, oh, for this question only this will work, or for that question only that methodology will work, I think could feel a bit misleading to you, because I could sit here and say, and if I want to just quickly get rid of this question and move to the next one, I could quickly say, oh, no. You know what? It's only going to work for this or only going to work for that. I've learned over the years that it's not just one size fits all. Okay.
Right.
So sometimes your research question may be so nuanced. Like, for instance, if your research question is, but broadly speaking, some research questions tend to be better answered by phenomenology than others. Let me give you an example. So my research question for my doctoral studies was, what is it like for leaders to be in a state of negative capability in periods of conflict and whatever in the workplace?
Right.
Okay. When I use the word expression, what is it like to be? I'm not specifically saying, is it true or is it false? Or I'm not looking for factors. I'm not looking for reasons. I'm not looking for rationale. So get rid of all that. If you're looking to understand the essence of somebody's lived experience, okay, you will find that becomes a very important aspect of doing it. So now, who's writing all this on the thing? Please don't interrupt this, please. Thank you. So I guess where I'm going with this is, certain questions will lend themselves to phenomenology, but that same question, if tweaked a little bit, right, could be answered by another methodology. It could be answered by narrative research. It could be answered by case study method. So, but if you go and study each methodology carefully, it will begin to occur to you that certain methodologies are used to answer certain types of questions, research questions. And unfortunately, it is out of the scope of our boundary today to be able to go into any in-depth, but I'll be very happy to take this offline with you. And, and talk to you about this, or via email we can exchange some notes about this. Sure. Question, because this question definitely comes in research. So if I have a research question, is it only that I can use phenomenology? Or phenomenology, will it work or not work? And all that. So that's a great question, though. But thank you so much, Arvind, that I appreciate your question. So somebody else, Soumya, I believe, had raised her hand or something.
Yeah, hello, sir. So my question might come from a place of extreme unfamiliarity, considering I'm just an undergrad student and I'm just exploring how qualitative research works. But what I'm curious about is that you talked about how after drawing individual case narratives, we move to creating a group narrative. But when we're talking about IPA, considering that each participant's lived experience can be drastically different from one another. Yes. So how exactly do we create a group narrative in that case, if all the participants have different things to say about what we're studying in that particular
and that is where the beauty of IPA lies. Because when you're doing a group narrative, you are not saying in the group that everybody had the same experience. You know, it is like the parable of the blind man and the elephant. Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like everybody was blindfolded. Each
Yeah.
person touched different parts of the elephant and thought, one thought that was a trunk of a tree, one thought it was a snake, one thought it was something else,
Yeah.
right? So it's multi-perspectival. Those that are familiar with the expression Anekant-vada, which is a Jainism construct of multiplicity of viewpoints and non-absolutism, will know that everybody's reality is different. It is socially constructed by all of us.
Right.
So when you're writing this group narrative, you're basically having a discussion showing the convergences and divergences both. In IPA, both are important.
Right.
Okay, so when you're creating a group narrative, you're not creating, this is not a group analysis.
Right.
It's a group narrative. Okay,
Right.
when you're discussing this, you're bringing literature from extant literature sources also.
Right.
You're making citations of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So does that answer your question? That
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
it does.
So it's when you do this work, when you actually practice this, you will understand that what I'm trying to say here. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Who else has a question?
Aditi wants to ask, in group narratives, do we use or indicate number of cases who talked about that particular theme?
Say that again. What was that?
In group narratives, do we use or indicate number of cases who talked about that particular theme?
Usually in group, now you can, there is no hard and fast rule. You can say that, yeah, it's a very good question. I think you can use your own novelty, your own judgment to do that. Like you can say, oh, you know, from all the cases, only 3 cases talked about that. And rather than saying the 3 cases, you would use those, the pseudonyms, and you would say like Gita or Gul or Farah, they talked about this, right? Or Bobby talked about this, right? And I'm connecting this to the extant literature, and this is where I find some connections. On the other hand, this other folks like Tom, Robin, and Anil talked about divergences. And the divergences are also important, right? We are not just looking for agreements. We're looking for disagreements also, because disagreements and agreements, divergences and convergences are all relating to the study phenomena. They're all emerging from the study phenomena, are they not? Because the purpose of research in when you're using IPA and in phenomenology is not to prove, disprove, hypothesize, taxonomize, refute, validate anything. It is just understanding the true essence of a phenomenon as it shows itself to us. Okay? Anybody else have a question?
Let me see. Okay, Govind has asked, can we use focus group discussion for phenomenology?
Wonderful question. Yeah.
If yes, how to do that? How to
Okay, so for one thing, if you are a doctoral student, I would highly recommend not using the focus group method for IPA. Focus groups tend to be more involved, and you will find it tougher to make sense of and draw meaning from those experiences. Because in focus groups, the moment you're talking about group, there's a group dynamic that is being set up. Correct? There's a group dynamic that's being set up. And until you have a tremendous amount of experience with small and large groups, I think you're going to find yourself missing some of that. But it certainly can be used. Focus groups can be used in IPA, but we don't recommend for newer researchers to use focus groups. It's better to do individual dyadic interviews. Okay? And any other questions that are just about this?
Yeah, so Bhanjan is asking if the firm is okay with mentioning their names in the publication or monograph. I guess it is within ethical consideration to mention their actual name in the case. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you do not ever, and I don't care who tells you this, you do not ever mention the actual names or the context of that in your research. You always use what is known as a pseudonym, a false name. So if it is Anil, you might say, whatever, give me a different name. So don't use my individual name, because remember, you've signed a contract with them. It's called the informed consent form. They have agreed to have you not use their names. So you've agreed to anonymity. Okay. So you cannot violate that. You cannot breach that. All right.
Mm.
We can take, we can take one or two more, and then we'll dive into. Yeah.
Okay. Farooq is asking that can we study a phenomena that is unclear or hidden to us?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I can do a whole entire session on that. Because what sometimes happens is, I'll take the example of my own phenomena, okay, that I was studying. Everybody's heard of John Keats, right? The famous English romantic poet, okay, in UK.
Yes.
In 1817, he was referring to the Shakespearean ability, the Shakespearean capacity to so become one with what he was writing about, or the person or the subject that he was talking about, that there was no difference between him and the subject. So John Keats was writing in a letter to his brothers, in which he said, this Shakespearean ability to stay in negative capability, which is the capacity to stay in mysteries, doubts, and uncertainties without the irritable reaching after fact and reason. To put it in lay terms, how to stay at the edge of certainty and uncertainty, knowing and not knowing. So mine was a very intricate, very nuanced phenomena. So when I approached my committee and said, I would like to do research on negative capability, one of my committee members said, oh my goodness, looks like Anil wants to hang like a monkey from the trees. Because who the heck is going to be, you're talking about poetry here, we're talking about leadership studies. How are you going to make this connection? It's such an abstract concept. It's so ephemeral, so fleeting. How are you going to do that? So when it's a very novel phenomena, IPA actually does great justice to that. I used IPA in my own research study, and that is why I'm such a proponent of IPA. But I don't say that IPA is one size fits all. I don't say that IPA can be used everywhere. IPA is a very specific approach when you're dealing with the lived experience of people, the direct lived experience of people. Okay, but when you're doing a novel research phenomena, yes, you can use IPA to do that very, very successfully. And we can take it offline also and discuss this if you have more pointed questions about that. So we can take one more and then we'll go into.
Okay. There is a question from Mahmoud. He is asking, please throw some light on it. How much divergent or convergent the participant's background be while considering a qualitative research?
Okay.
Participant's background. How much divergent or convergent the participant's background be while considering a qualitative research?
So is he talking about when you're recruiting the participants? Is that
yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Otherwise, he can ask the question if he is in the session. Mahmoud?
Yeah, let Mahmoud ask the question directly.
Yeah, Mahmoud. You can unmute yourself, Mahmoud.
Yeah, good evening, Doctor.
Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, my question is regarding yesterday's session, I guess. Yeah, exactly what you said. I just want to know what kind of, actually, I'm not into research. This is a very intuitive question coming from my side. the background of the participant, suppose I'm considering for or recruiting. So how much, suppose I'm a teacher, I want to take few students. So the student's background in a course can be from different universities or colleges. My question is like this.
Okay, so you have to have in IPA, we talk about a purposive sample.
Okay.
A purposive sample really literally means that a sample with a purpose. So
okay.
If you're interviewing the experiences of nurses or midwives or teachers or executive CEOs or whatever, it would stand to reason that the participants are all CEOs, right? All teachers or all nurses or all midwives, right? Or all unwed mothers, correct? Because you're looking at the lived experience of these people.
Yeah, my point is that the different kind of culture they come from, maybe take the case of Middle East, of US, of India.
No, that's hey, it's a wonderful thing. It adds richness to your study. Why would you want to confine, unless now, for instance, I just helped a doctoral student, and Gul knows about this, who was doing a transgender motivation. The phenomenon was transgender motivation, transgender entrepreneurship in Pakistan. Okay.
Okay.
And now, of course, because her context is Pakistan, her study is related to how transgenders, what struggles they go through, how they feel marginalized, and how they come up with this idea of entrepreneurship in such a difficult situation. So it stands to reason that all her research participants were from Pakistan. Now, if she just wanted transgender motivation, to study transgender motivation generically without any specific context, such as a specific country, she could look at transgenders from India, transgenders from Pakistan, transgenders from Saudi Arabia, wherever, right?
And Doctor, does IPA is applied here in this case when we take a divergent background?
Yeah, of course.
Does it limit this?
No, there's no limit to this. The only limit is our own imagination.
Okay.
If we limit ourselves, then everything else will limit us in life. Correct, Gul?
Yeah, sure.
We can't allow ourselves to be limited. Now, by what I mean by that is we don't go all over the place and make it all free for all. We have to follow a certain protocol. But even in IPA, the researchers, the individual developers of IPA totally understand that people are going to use their own novelty. They're going to use their own creativity. They're not saying this is the one-step approach and 1, 2, 3, 4, only you follow this approach. If you're not following this approach, you're not doing IPA. It's open. That is why the most beautiful research methodologies that are developed. Now, as I get into grounded theory, I'm giving some rudiments of grounded theory, you will see that grounded theory was developed by, the traditional grounded theory was developed by Glaser and Strauss. But the more modern, the more contemporary versions are more constructivist. By Kathy Sharma's, who's done phenomenal work on that. So her approach, while it is steeped in Glaser and Strauss' original foundation, original framework, but she has taken a different perspective, taken a different path. It's okay. Freud and Carl Jung worked together, right? As a matter of fact, Carl Jung was his disciple. And then they broke up.
Yeah, may I?
Whatever they had combined, and Carl Jung went ahead and created his own body of work, and Freud has his own body of work. So this is how we bring newness and novelty to that. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Small point I want to ask: does this make the research tougher, or is it like this? Makes it easier or tougher? I guess it makes it tougher.
What makes it tougher?
if we take a more divergent view from the participants?
Well, it certainly does. It certainly does, because now you're looking at cross-cultural nuances, which can be difficult to understand, right? Now, you may understand the Pakistan situation or the India situation, depending on what country of origin you're from. You may understand that very well. You may relate to that very well, but you may not have a really good understanding about a different culture, right? So to remain in that culture, to remain in that life world of the people, as a novice researcher, I would recommend not going out of those bounds. Now, if you want to do more advanced research, postdoc research and all, you can certainly open up and do phenomenal researches other places, because you may like to understand the culture of another place as it relates to your study phenomena. Right?
Thanks.
So, yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Gul, anybody else, or should we dive into the next segment? Gul? Okay, I guess she was not there. All right. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the focus here a little bit. Just finished doing the IPA. I'm actually going to go and into grounded theory now. All right. Hopefully you can all see this, right? Mahmood, can you see this?
Yeah, Doctor.
Okay,
yeah,
great, terrific. I just wanted to make sure everybody has this. All right. So Gul may have just stepped away for a couple of minutes. Now we're going to talk about grounded theory. Now, just please understand the similarities and differences between phenomenology and grounded theory. Okay. They're both inductive approaches. They're not deductive. They're both inductive approaches. By inductive, what do we mean? They go from specific cases to a more generalized narrative. All right. They are both qualitative research methods or approaches. All right. Now, don't get caught up in the terminology of grounded theory method, GTM, substantive grounded theory, formal grounded theory. Don't worry about that too much right now. Okay. Just remember that grounded, first try to understand the basics of grounded theory before we get into the weeds. Okay. Now, what is grounded theory? Now, grounded, how do you define grounded theory? What is it grounded in? What is this word grounded coming from? We understand theory, but what is the theory as it relates to the groundedness? What is the objective in pursuing grounded theory? Why were Glaser and Strauss so eager to change the research landscape? Because they were both positivist scientists. What was so compelling for them to create something brand new that was not being offered before that? So they were the creators of what is known as grounded theory method, right? So let's look at that. All right, so grounded theory, before I give you some sort of a definition of grounded theory, let's take a look at some expressions or terms as they relate to grounded theory. Induction. So I just said it is an inductive approach. It goes from specific to general. It starts with very specific cases. So again, just the way in IPA you were doing individual in-depth interviews, you are doing the same individual in-depth interviews in grounded theory also. The difference here is that in grounded theory, you may have to go back and interview the same participant 2 or 3 times. And I'll come to that reason why. Deduction, which is mostly positivist, from general to specific, starts with general observations. Abduction. Now, this is something you're going to read a lot about in grounded theory. What is abduction? Abduction, not as an alien abduction, folks. Aliens are not coming to abduct us. Just being silly. But it starts with an observation. What is abduction? Start with an observation, then attempts to find the simplest, most plausible explanation. Now, as you're reading this, consider, close your eyes and think about some of the verbiage that I was using when I was talking about phenomenology yesterday. I was not talking about observation in phenomenology. I was not looking about explanation in phenomenology. I was not looking at plausibility. I was not looking at factors, right? I was looking at something else. So this starts with an observation, then attempts to find the simplest, most plausible explanation. It considers all possible theoretical explanations for the data and forms hypotheses for each, then pursues the best course of action. Did I use the word hypothesis yesterday in phenomenology? No. Remember I said phenomenology does not attempt to refute, validate, hypothesize, taxonomize, explain, define. All of that stuff now comes in grounded theory. Grounded theory is about theoretical explanations from data sets, hypotheses for each, then pursues the best course of action. You did not hear course of action in phenomenology. There is no such thing as a course of action. Because as the phenomena speaks to you, you're learning about the essence of the phenomena, which is not what your purpose here is. So what is the purpose in grounded theory? The grounded theory is a systematic methodology in the social sciences involving the construction of theory through what is grounded in the research data itself. Please, let's stay with this for a few minutes. Grounded theory is a systematic methodology. It's a methodology with a system. It's very scientific. Even though it's not positivist, but it is very scientific, very structured methodology in the social sciences involving the construction of theory. So why would you use grounded theory? You know, when I was doing my research, I got suddenly doctoral studies. I fell in love with the concept of grounded theory. I told my dissertation chair, I said, wow, Dr. Silverman, this sounds like an exciting research methodology. Maybe I should do this grounded theory myself for my research question. He said, do you want to graduate? Or are you going to remain in this program forever? Grounded theory, folks, can be a very long and very painstaking process. Okay, so don't fool yourself into thinking that this is a simple 1, 2, 3. It's very, very complicated. Okay, but it's very systematic. And don't get into grounded theory unless don't get into grounded theory because you fall in love with grounded theory. Get into grounded theory, deploy grounded theory because you really have a compelling motivation to either construct a new theory or to refine an existing theory. So either you're constructing a brand new theory or you're refining an existing theory. Most cases of grounded theory are about refining an existing theoretical framework around a certain phenomenon and creating more explanations, more in-depth, more nuances, more richness to that study phenomena. Grounded theory is in and about the data. Just remember, folks, in grounded theory, all you are dealing with is data. What is the data that I'm talking about? The data that I talk about is the data that is emerging from the interviews only. There is no other data you're talking about. Only data that is emerging from the interviews is relevant data to your research. It does not seek grand theories that may not have anything to do with a particular study. So you are not explaining in grounded theory right? You're not using grant theories that have been used by somebody else. And by the way, and I'll be talking about it in the next slide also. In grounded theory, typically, the traditional view was that you do not create chapter 2 first. You might say, some of you are rolling your eyes and saying, oh, so you do not have to write a literature review. No, I didn't say that. I said you don't first create the literature review and then do the research. You allow literature review to be there, but you don't start making connections first. So bibliography and literature and all that is done post the study, after the study is done. And you'll understand the reason why as I move forward with this. It is an inductive approach to research, which I just talked about. Grounded theory concepts. Unlike traditional methodologies, grounded theory does not begin with an existing theoretical, meta-theoretical framework or design. So there is no design in mind. There are no preconceived notions about this is the way it's going to be. You're allowing whatever data to emerge, and you're trying to then refine that data through saturation, doing more interviews, through comparative case analysis and stuff of that nature. So everything emerges from the data. The researcher does not start with the research bibliography or literature review, which I just mentioned. So the literature review, so people would ask, okay, well, wait a second, but then I don't have a landing ground. I don't have any foundation here. What am I going to research? What am I going to get back? The idea is you have some notion about a study phenomenon, but you don't start supporting that, don't start validating that in your mind, even before you open up the whole research process. So what is emerging from the data, from the interviews, will inform the bibliography, will inform the literature review. You'll then know what literature to dig into, because guess what? If you're going to be creating a brand new theory, better be careful. More often than not, somebody else in the past, maybe in past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, may already have written about that theory. So you have to be walking on eggshells. You can't just say, oh, I've created a brand new theory, because it will be put to the test by your faculty, by the academic scholars. Somebody might come out and say, hey, wait a second, before you go any further, don't get excited, man. This has already been written about, and here's the citation. So you do not do the bibliography, you do not do the literature review in advance. You do it later. This typically comes last after the data has been collected and when one wants to make comparisons between emergent and extant theories. Emergent is what is emerging in your data, and you make comparisons with extant. Extant is already existing there. Okay. Now, some other concepts: categories, coding, constant comparative analysis. Categories are grouping together of instances, kind of like emerging themes. Okay, sound familiar? Grouping together of instances. What are instances? Are emerging themes, right? Events, processes, and occurrences that share central features. Why I call it an emergent theme is they share central features, kind of like in phenomenology when you talk about an emergent theme. An emergent theme is emergent theme about what? An emergent theme about your study phenomena. Likewise, if you have drawn a hypothesis here, and by the way, it's perfectly legit to have a hypothesis here first, okay, in grounded theory, and then go ahead and do the research. Categories may be at a lower or higher level of abstraction. What by that we mean is, when you look at the data, you're seeing what is, kind of like almost like superordinate, subordinate themes, the lower level or higher level of abstraction. But in the case of grounded theory, low abstraction means something different. It just means categories such as descriptive labels, anger, pity, etc. Right? So it's a low abstraction. High abstraction categories are analytic, interpretative. So when you just look at certain words are popping up, anger, pity, resentment, or anxiety, these are just labels. Yeah, they're feelings, they're emotions, but they're just labels, right? But when you dig into the data and you find that certain data sets are analyzing, are interpreting that anger, or interpreting the pity, or interpreting the tenderness, or whatever. Those are higher abstraction categories. So you have to label, or you have to actually earmark the low abstraction categories and high abstraction categories. Okay. Coding. Now, coding is a process by which categories are identified and divided into low and high categories. So you do the process of coding, which you also do somewhat in interpretive phenomenological analysis. You also code there. In analysis of data, descriptive labels are initially attached to low categories, such as emotions, anxiety. As analysis progresses, coding identifies data that shares characteristics of higher abstraction, where interpretation of labels can begin, such as anxiety. What does anxiety represent? Why is there so much fear in the system? So data that speaks to that becomes more relevant from the standpoint of these higher category. Okay, so just remember that now. Axial coding. Somebody had asked in one of those questions yesterday that they wanted to know about axial coding. Well, I think when they registered, they wanted to know especially about axial coding. Axial coding is the breaking down of core themes during qualitative analysis. So that axial coding is not just related to grounded theory. It can be in any qualitative research. Is a breaking down of core themes during qualitative analysis. When you're doing the deconstruction, you're doing the distillation process. In grounded theory, though, axial coding is the process of relating codes, categories. Remember that I was talking about categories and concepts to each other using inductive and deductive thinking. Now, here's where it gets hairy. Even though it's an inductive approach to research, the process of deduction also sometimes comes in, all right? So when you're looking at this comparative, and when you're doing the axial coding, is the process of relating the codes to each other using categories and concepts. You're using inductive and deductive reasoning. You do both types of reasoning, okay? Inductive and deductive. All right. So let's go to the next one. A coding process, you'll hear the word constant comparative analysis. A coding process that maintains the momentum by moving back and forth between convergences and divergences. Here again, some commonalities between IPA and grounded theory. In IPA also, I remember I talked about convergences and divergences. Here also, you're looking for convergences and divergences. Both are very critical. Both are important to the theory that you're developing or to the theory that you are trying to refine. It ensures that the researcher is not only accumulating categories, accumulating themes, but also categorizing them into smaller units of meaning. See how sound familiar? I was talking about the deconstruction, narrowing down, right? Distilling into smaller subunits. Likewise, you're doing that in grounded theory. The goal is to not get into a homogeneous mindset and allow all complexity to make its way into emergent theory. So the goal is not to get into a homogeneous mindset that you get into everything has to be homogenized there. You have to open your mind out to variances, to other uncertainties that come in, because you're trying to actually develop or a new theory or refine something. So you allow your mind and allow all complexity to make its way into the emergent theory. So the more complex your existing theory is, or the theory that you're trying to develop, the more rich that theory will be, the more nuanced that theory will be. Negative case analysis and theoretical sensitivity. So the researcher emerges or immerses in the data and looks for negative cases. What are negative cases? Negative cases are categories that do not fit. Remember, I was talking about in IPA earlier when I said it's out of all the raw words, there are some words that, or some expressions that do not relate to the study phenomena at all. So you don't really need to give them too much attention anyway. So these instances are identified and explicated in analysis in order to give the depth. Okay, now, in that case, that meaning IPA, I said you can get rid of those, right? Remember from like 27, 28, we came down to very few, 5 or 6 for each transcript. Now, I told you to get rid of it, delete that, eliminate that, the other words. Here, you don't eliminate them, you talk about that. You talk about negative cases are very important. When you're building the theory or refining the theory, you're talking about these instances and identifying them and explicating them, describing them, explaining them in analysis in order to give the depth and complexity to your emergent theory. See how complex this whole process is. The researcher interacts with the data. Okay, sorry, I'm going to the next slide. The researcher interacts with the data in order to identify low and high abstractions and framing, coding them into additional categories while remaining sensitive to the process. So the researcher is interacting with the data. Now, this is a different form of interaction. In IPA, we're talking about a paradoxically bilateral relationship between the researcher and the researched, or researcher and the participant. They both co-create this process. Here, the researcher is interacting with the data more than with the participant. Okay, in order to identify, so because there's this volume of data that's come out, and the researcher is looking at this data very, very carefully. It's a very solitary process of research. You could go on for years and years sometimes, trying to figure out what's going on. But you remain sensitive to the process. You're doing coding, you're doing framing, you're doing the high abstractions and low abstraction, categorization, but you remain true to the entire process, okay? Theoretical sampling and theoretical saturation. You probably have heard of sampling. You heard of sampling in the IPA also. We talked about small samples, big samples. Sampling involves collecting further data in analysis so that the emergent theories can be challenged. So you have to keep collecting data until you realize you're reaching a stage of saturation, data saturation, where new data is not adding anything of value to your research phenomena or to your research discovery process. So saturation occurs when no new categories, no new themes are being identified. It is only a goal, but not the reality, for any modification changes will inevitably call for additional data, which may yield new material, okay? So I'm just giving you these concepts because I think they're important from the standpoint of understanding the nuances of theoretical sampling, okay? Now, this is a thing that might be very scary to many of you here. It's the tentative nature of GT or grounded theory research. When generation of theory is the aim, one is constantly alert to the emergent perspectives What does that mean? So when you're developing this, you're sitting in this lab or in your own office and you're developing, you're hitting your head against the wall and trying to figure out about this theory. And while you're doing it, you're not doing it in a vacuum. You're not sitting on an island. You're on planet Earth. Remember, there are other people also looking at probably the same phenomena through the grounded theory approach. So there is emerged, as you're doing the research, other researchers are also emerging with data, new perspectives. So one is constantly alert to emergent perspectives, what will change and help develop the theory. So what is it that is going to help you develop the theory? These perspectives can easily occur on the final day of study. Now, just remember this. So you spent 5 years, 6 years on doing this grounded theory. You said, oh my goodness, so I'm going to be developing this amazing new theory. All right. That it will be attributed to me forever and ever for posterity. And wow, I'm already there. I'm going to graduate soon. These perspectives can easily occur on the final day of study or when the manuscript is reviewed in page proof for proofreading. Suddenly, while you open this out and now you send it for proof, reading and all that, one of your faculty members or somebody else reading this might say, oh, wait a second. He's writing about cognitive dissonance. I'm just taking an example. Cognitive dissonance was a theory that was developed by such and such in 1965. So how is this guy or gal writing about cognitive dissonance and claiming that this is her theory? Well, guess what? All hell's going to break loose. They're going to come down on you and they're going to say, sorry, your published word or the word that is about to be published is not the final one. It's only a pause in the never-ending process of generating theory. You have to go back now to the drawing board and collect more data or take a different view to this. Otherwise, we cannot sign off on your grounded theory method. So you remember the complexity that can arise with that? It can be really okay. So I just got a message from Gul that she was unable to connect. She's trying. I'm sorry for that. I'm going to say don't worry. Okay, I know these things happen. All right. So we will probably take care of this ourselves. So just remember that this is the tentative nature of GT research. That even till the last day, somebody could dispute that. Somebody could challenge you, which is not the case with other methodologies or other studies. But in this, it is very, very possible. So you could be spending so many years painstakingly doing this research and you suddenly find, oh my goodness, somebody's pulling the rug from right under my feet now. I have to go back to the drawing board. Here, everybody was opening champagne. They were getting ready to celebrate my graduation. Well, that's the nature of the thing. So you have to be very careful before you enter into grounded theory. It's a long, drawn out, painstaking process. Okay, be careful with that. Okay, so at this point, what I'd like to do is, we have about 20 minutes more. I'd like to open it up for questions. Now, unfortunately, I'm not moderating here, so I will probably have to go into, if you raise your hands and just unmute yourself and ask the question and just start talking.
Anil, there are no questions at the moment in the chat box.
Who is this?
So this is Kanika here.
Oh, hi Kanika, how are you? Yeah.
I thought I'm good. I thought of volunteering to help you with the chat box questions. So okay. There's none here at the moment.
None in the chat box, but I'm sure there's some people will have questions about grounded theory in their own minds and heads right now. So if
Sure.
Anika, if you could just see if anybody's raising a hand or whatever, we can have them talk.
Sure, there's none at the moment.
Nobody's raised a hand?
Not,
Is everybody
not yet.
totally clear about grounded
So,
theory?
we just got one question from Subhanshan Sengupta.
Yeah.
And the question is, I came across the term data sufficiency.
Yeah.
Is that same as theoretical saturation?
Yes, yes, yes. It's used interchangeably.
Okay. Prasoon Srivastav has a question. Please unmute yourself and please ask the question right away.
Yeah. Who was the gentleman?
Prasoon Srivastav. Do you prefer typing that up in the chat box? You're welcome to do that as well. Otherwise, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question.
It would be nice to hear.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So he's saying, just give me a couple of minutes. Sure. Take your time.
Yeah. Meanwhile, somebody else may have a question.
Sure. Looks like everybody is pretty clear about it.
Clear as mud. This is the part. This is very dense. This grounded theory is a monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really.
So we have one raised hand at the moment.
Okay.
Antonio, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Or
hi sir, hi sir, Dr. Anil here. Mama Nawaz, I'm Antonio from Austria.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How about you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thank you.
I have enjoyed your first session today. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
I have to ask one question. You can say question or to add something that I have also conducted 30 interviews, semi-structured interviews.
Okay.
And in this, I have submitted my thesis and waiting for the reviews, but I am sharing my experiences and I have one question based on that.
Good, go ahead.
I have conducted manual analysis, thematic analysis of my structure interviews when I transcribed, because I conducted interviews in different languages like Sindhi language, Urdu language, English. Then I needed to do myself. And it took a lot of time. And after then, I did manual analysis following the literature and the steps of the analysis. So let's say that generally it is suggested to follow or to use NVivo software or Atlas softwares for that to generate the codes, themes, and categories. So when we generate or we create codes, these are some kind of the words which are repeated in the text literature, which shows identification, but it does not show the meaning or sense of different words, which can translate or we can categorize them in, we can group them in some same theme. Let's suppose that I had experience of this. Like when I was talking about them, there are some different issues regarding corruption. Corruption was financial corruption, time corruption, moral corruption. So we were discussing these things in different ways, which I just put in the theme of the corruption, and I then elaborated that what has been by corruption and what things include here in this theme. So when we use NVivo software or another software, these softwares may not translate these things in this way.
So you raised a very, very important topic here, which is earlier, remember I was saying that software is just software.
Of course, I was listening to you and I was feeling happy to listen to these comments.
Yeah, because software, people say, oh, the software is the panacea. It's going to solve all my problems. I just feed all the data, then I can sit back and relax, and the software is going to do the work. Well, guess what? You cannot substitute humans. All right?
Yeah.
Because the software is only as good as the data that you feed into it. Because if you feed garbage in, garbage out, not that I'm suggesting people will feed garbage, but it will only identify keywords, key expressions, some convergences, some divergences, and that's great. That's great. It helps you. But who's going to analyze that data?
Yeah.
Who's going to make the connections between that data that is emerging and your literature?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You. Who's going
Yes.
to analyze? Who's going to interpret? Who's going to make sense? Who's going to draw meaning from that data? You are going to do that. So
Yes.
I'm not suggesting that I have any aversion to using software. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm all out for this. That if you have a big, large data set, a large corpus, then you may want to use the software such as NVivo and Atlas or whatever you want to use. But just always remember that you are the one who's doing the study, not NVivo.
Yes.
It's only a tool in your hands.
Here I need your suggestion and guide as well. That when I was defending my proposal, I had mentioned that I will use NVivo software.
Yes.
And members of the doctoral committee were also agreed that it's okay. But when I was doing practically, I was feeling comfortable and more interesting to do by manual. So now I have submitted my thesis and waiting for my reviews, and I hope in couple of next months it will be possible. Maybe I will defend my thesis.
Wonderful. Keep us all in the loop. Let us know. We would love to congratulate you at that point, because it's a landmark. It's the final milestone, not the final. Well, really, I always laugh and say the work actually starts after you do your PhD, not before you do your PhD. Because once you earn the stripes, you have certain accountabilities. You're held to a higher standard, right? Because it's kind of like a doctor who's in medical school but not yet a doctor. But the moment you become the doctor, you take the Hippocratic oath. You are held to a higher standard. Do no harm, right? So you brought up a very nice. I'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can exchange some thoughts about this.
Sure. I have already planned to discuss with you. After this defense, I will need your mentorship to write some papers with you.
Anytime. We were happy to. Anybody else? We have about 15 minutes more for the.
My question is still pending. What I want to ask here, that how can I defend my doctoral committee? How can I convince them for this reason? Because they are always superstar professors and always argue about the use of softwares. And if we do not follow that track, we do not use applications, then they feel that it's a lack of some kind of the skills, expertise, or something else. So how can we can convince them?
So you're doing qualitative research using thematic analysis, right?
Yes.
Okay. You can always make a case and just say, hey, listen, I was using the NVivo and I have become more confused using the NVivo than I was doing it manually. Manually, I've spent more hours doing it. I have, because you're intimately then understanding because this is stuff that you have researched. You are the best judge of that. The NVivo doesn't know who you interviewed, right?
Yeah.
NVivo is only doing the textual analysis.
Yes.
But who brought the subjectivity into it? You. So you say that you can make a case to them, and that, look, I started with the NVivo analysis, but I'm really finding that manual analysis served me much better. You can get away with that.
That's good. That's good.
If you want me to, I can help you write some sort of a rationale for that. Okay.
Yeah.
And which will not be, which will be more indefensible. Not that I'm saying totally indefensible, but that it will give you a little bit of leeway.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah, because you don't want to get into a whole discussion about, you're trying to do your doctorate, whole discussion about why you did not do the NVivo. That should be last on their minds, correct?
Yeah.
Sometimes when you downplay that in a very scholarly way, then they don't ask you further questions. Remember that. Okay, who else?
All right, so we have Subhanjan going for a question, and after that we have Prasoon and Aditi.
Okay,
so Subhanjan, go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah, hi. Hello, doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Just call me
Yeah.
Anil, not doctor.
Hi, Anil. Yeah, this is Shubhanjan Sengupta from Delhi.
Oh, Delhi. Okay.
Hi. Yeah. So it seemed to me that initially you mentioned about the fact that grounded theory research has got a contribution towards creating a hypothesis. I guess you meant proposition, right?
Okay. I didn't say that is creating a hypothesis. I said you start with a hypothesis.
Okay. So you did not imply theoretical propositions.
No. Sometimes these are interchangeable terms. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm calling a hypothesis, you may say theoretical proposition. So basically what you're doing is you're proposing that this in such and such process does not currently have an existing background theory, right? So
okay.
my theoretical proposition is that this can be looked at from a different angle or a different perspective, so we can look at it, this phenomena and throw more light into that, either refine the theory or come up with a new theory. So we are using the same expression. It's because even a theoretical proposition is a hypothesis. You're making a hypothesis.
Okay, right. So somewhere I was connecting it to the idea of, and correct me if I'm wrong, grounded theory research intends to come up with a process theory. I'm sorry, perhaps the conversation will be taken towards process thinking and Anne Langley, and I don't want to go into that, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that when we're using...
First of all, just remember one thing, when you are with me in a classroom, I will never correct you if you're wrong.
Oh, that's so kind of you.
Because for me, there's no right or wrong answers. Okay. All right. And if you felt that there was something wrong, you will, through your own discovery process as a scholar, realize it through your readings, through your research, that perhaps you were incorrect about that. And you will correct yourself rather than me correcting you, or your peers will correct you.
Right. Absolutely. Indeed. So when we use the grounded theory approach with a multi-case design of Eisenhard, I think at the end of the day, we want to create a process theory, a mid-range process theory, but with theoretical propositions.
Yes.
But when we are using the Joya approach, then we are not going to create propositions, right? Because we do not have a typical multi-case. Yes. But we are just going to live it to the process theory being generated. Can you please help me get a clarification in that?
Okay, so it is outside the scope of our session.
Yes.
Okay?
That's why I said I'm sorry.
Can we take this back channel? Okay.
Yeah.
And in a private messaging or private email exchange, we can certainly look at that because it would be doing a disservice to others who may have other questions.
Okay.
I just want to be mindful of the time boundary. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, got it.
So go ahead. Who's next, Kanika?
Prasoon.
Okay.
Prasoon, your question, please.
Hello. Hi, sir. This is Prasoon this side. How are you?
Prasoon, how are you? Good.
I'm pretty good, sir.
Where are you in Ahmedabad?
No. I'm from Bhopal, but I work in. So I'm a research fellow with this Delhi Assembly.
Oh, okay.
So,
very nice. Yeah.
So so basically, I want to tell you something about my profile, that I was a mechanical engineer, and then I did my master's from TIS in rural development.
Ah, nice. Master's from TIS.
So I don't have much of research experience, but I'm just working with the organization and other NGOs I have worked with, and so I have a hand-on experience with the research methodology part.
Okay.
So, sir, I have used grounded theory not with a more profundity earlier, but I had a doubt. So I would like to put an example where I was working with the Begas in Mandla district in MP, if you know about them. So, like as you told that for the grounded theory, one has to go for inductive methodology so that they can go like 1, 2nd, and 3rd time talk with the person for the recollection. So what happened is, what I observed from my experiment, like during the experiment, that whenever I'm going and to meet the respondent, behavior change, or there was some question, like there was a difference in the answer and the response.
Okay.
So I would like you to tell me that what. So maybe possibly. So what I think is, maybe he was first at the right time, but he was not. He was manipulating me at the third time, third visit. So what do you think? What should a person should do with respect to these three cases? Like, if I go for 3 times, then what should I do?
And you're going, and you're saying you're approaching this with grounded theory, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that it's a more involved answer, or a more involved clarification. So I think that we should take it separately, especially because of the time limit now. All right. So we can do it via private email if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. So, and one more question I have.
Go ahead.
So if we use like more about qualitative analysis, we talk about a lot of things to be it's a deep research thing. So why can we make a model where we can use the qualitative analysis by using grounded theory and do a quantitative methodology for a proper decision making thing?
Okay, you're talking about putting 2 elephants together. Both are gigantic. Okay.
Yeah. So because
itself is so involved and can be so convoluted. My friend, what I would suggest is take only one thing at a time. Take only that much that you can chew, because you're going to go crazy. All right, with all the data that comes out in grounded theory and the iteration process, going back and forth, doing multiple interviews and all that, it's going to be, so stay with one. Let's not get overzealous and chew on more than we can take on.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, remember, you also have to report your findings.
Yes.
So don't, just because somebody says, "Oh, it looks great," why don't you do this and why don't you do that? A lot of people will tell you to do a lot of things. Just remember your own realistic limitations. Okay.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, you want to do quality research. You don't want to just do shoddy research. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Who's next?
All right. So there's a question in the chat box from Aditi Roy Chaudhary.
Okay.
Would Aditi, you're okay me reading the question, or would you rather prefer you asking the question?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes.
Aditi, why don't you talk?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Anil. This is Aditi from Kolkata, India.
Okay, great.
I'm basically a public health nutritionist.
Okay.
So I have used qualitative research methodologies, but not this grounded theory. This is very new to me.
Yes.
And as you were saying, this is quite heavy.
Yes.
So I'm just going to ask a very basic question, actually. So why should a researcher decide on to use this grounded theory? Like, what are the advantages of using it? And if you could give some examples of, where this was used and how it was used.
Okay.
So it just bring more clarity to.
So I'm not being facetious, I'm really being serious, but giving it a lighter vein. So your first part one of your question is, why would somebody use it? If you're totally crazy, you would go for grounded theory. No, just kidding. Because it's very, very convoluted, very complex. Okay. So you have to be very careful that when you're treading into grounded theory, okay, that you understand the complexities and the nuances of this approach and the lengthy time that it can take. Okay. So that's why a lot of people shy away from doing grounded theory, right? Because it's a long process. Now, when would grounded theory be used? As I was saying earlier, so if you look at a process, if you look at a concept, look at a phenomenon, and you feel that, you're losing sleep over that is not being answered, there's still so ambiguity around that in your work. And you're always perplexed because you're going back into the literature, you're trying to read about it, trying to understand it, and there's no explanation around that, no theories around that. That compels you as a researcher. Maybe you want to create a new theory about that. Or if there is something already that exists, maybe you want to give it a newer framework. At that point in time, you may decide let me embark on this, knowing fully well that this could be a long marriage. It could be a long process of doing it. Okay?
Okay.
So does that answer somewhat your question?
Yeah, and could you just give one or two examples of where maybe this was used?
Well, you can use the, if you are studying a school system, okay? Why is it that despite the diversity in the school, right? Okay, this diversity meaning racial diversity in the school. There are African Americans, there are Asian Americans, there are certainly whites, there are every different people. All, despite the racial composition of the school, why is it that the system is not offering enough by way of diversity training? What are the factors that are influencing that? So the moment you talk about factors, you're going into the realm of grounded theory. Because you're understanding what is the process. What is the process that unfolds within the school system? Why is it that there is not, despite the fact that there's a 50-50 composition of whites to non-whites, and yet the processes, the administrative, they're all geared more towards the white population. So what is happening? Why is diversity not making its way into that? So what are the factors that are responsible for that?
Okay, thank you.
Or another way would be, like, I'm going to take the example of pandemic right now, which we're all facing. We're all locked down. At least I know I am. I've not stepped out of the house for 3 months here. So despite the pandemic, despite feelings of anxiety, of isolation, of abandonment, even for some people, and people are feeling very depressed, people are feeling very cut off, distance. Why is it that they're not seeking emotional counseling? What stops them from seeking emotional counseling? What is happening in their mental processes? Knowing fully well that they can get better because now telehealth is available. Their insurance plan may be paying for that, but they're still not seeking it out. What might be, I'm just giving you some examples off the top of my head. Okay.
Yeah, that makes it. Yeah, it makes it easier to understand the whole.
The factors. So anytime you're trying to understand the factors, anytime you understand the process that is occurring, you're trying to go really deep into that process to understand that. And that's when you use, now you can use case study methods, you can use many other different methods, you can use a ethnography, you can use participatory action research. You can use a lot, but sometimes, but if you're really into developing the new theory around that to make a difference out there, then you would go for grounded theory. Okay, so we just have a couple of different, just a few more minutes for any other questions. I'd be very happy to field them.
So there is one request from in the chat box from Anuja Sehgal. She requests if you can share a few good papers on phenomenology, that'll help. And we have one hand raised from Everett. Okay. So Everett, you might want to just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Everett. How are you?
Yeah, depending on the country that you're in.
Yeah.
I am fine, Dr. Anil. Yes. Just to comment, yes. In terms of the grounded theory, yes. I'm in agreement with what Dr. Behal says in terms of the grounded theory being a very long research. As a PhD student, I would recommend prospective students not to really do a grounded theory study because it can take a long time. And I can give an example of a grounded theory that was done by this professor. She's in one of the universities in Canada. Her name is Judy Boychuk. And she did transition as it related to critical care nurses. And it took her over 10 years to develop that theory.
Good.
Yes, it took her 10 years. Because what she did too was to interview nurses at different stages of their transition, like maybe during the first stage, during orientation, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and so on. And dependent on the feedback that she got, then she'd have to go to other participants in order to get some more information. So it can be a very long and winding process. So I would say to fellow PhD students as well, because when I started initially my PhD studies, I sought to do that because I was encouraged to do so. But then after doing readings on Strauss and those persons, Charmes, then I found that this can be a long winding process.
Wonderful. You have summed up my thoughts exactly, Everett. Thank you so much for doing that. And that is what I've been saying, that it's very dense, it's very convoluted, it's very complex, and it's not recommended for the novice researcher. Am I saying that nobody should do it? No. Go ahead, knock yourself out. But if you're going to spend the next 8 years of your life, okay, without the PhD, then so be it. All right, go for it. Nobody's stopping you, but just be very careful. So what was the other question, Kanika, in that chat box?
Yeah, so there wasn't a question. There was a request from Soumya. And
yes, sorry, the request. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, and on that note, what I can do is summarize this and wrap this up now. You will be all very happy to know that you will all receive a comprehensive plethora of resources in an online folder. Just give me a couple of days to compile that folder together. You will receive the most state-of-the-art stuff on IPA. You will receive ebooks as part of that on phenomenology, grounded theory. You will I'll share more than you can ever go through. All right. So the idea of doing that later, post the workshop and not before, I didn't want you to get into the weeds. I wanted to, that's why I shared with you only a couple of links to read and all that. But the idea now is to take our learning forward. And I know that not everybody would be interested in taking the learning forward, but those that are, okay, is the law of 2 feet. So whoever's here is here, you know, and I'd be very happy to provide my expertise or resources or whatever to those that I wanted to take this forward. And if you want to seek my personal guidance and help, I will be very happy to do that, because a lot of this stuff cannot be done in a group setting, in a Zoom setting, that we can talk, take it off channel by private email. I think that might be better. So with that, I want to thank each and every one of you, those that were present yesterday and are present today till the very end. Thank you so much. Namaste. I really appreciate it because I know it's very, very difficult to sit through, and that, so we've tried to have the interactive sessions from time to time so as to not make it very boring. But I know it can be very mentally draining to sit through material, especially if that material does not pertain to you directly, or somebody is not currently doing a PhD or research and then would be wanting to do that. But so I commend you for your patience to sit through this. So again, thank you so very much. We have you on your distribution list. And if you have any questions or concerns and things of that nature, please let us know. And if you could, Kanika, if you could just cut and paste this entire chat, because there is no way for me to save the chat.
It's there in your inbox already.
Oh, you already sent it. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so you sent it with via email or did?
Yes, email.
Okay. Oh, excellent, excellent. You're one step ahead of me. Thank you. You should be the one leading this session. Someday you will be leading these sessions. Thank you so much, and thank you all. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart for all the work and all your interaction and all your listening and participation. You take care and be safe from this awful pandemic, and hopefully this too shall pass, and then we'll be able to meet sometime in the near future, face to face with everybody. All right. Take care and good luck.
Just don't end. I just need to take just these last pictures.
Sure. No, I'm not ending it right now.
Sure. Okay, I think we're good to go. Thank you.
Okay, done. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
again, guys.
Right.
Everybody, have a great day or night or whatever the case may be.
Right. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.